Maybe you have one. Maybe you're still deciding. A small mark, somewhere on your skin, that means something only to you. It feels modern. It feels like something your generation reached for. It isn't. The oldest tattoos ever found are more than 5,000 years old, 61 of them, all of them on a single body, a man who froze to death high in the Alps before the first pyramid was ever stacked. But here's the strange part. He didn't get them to look good. And the real answer to why is far stranger than that. You probably assume tattoos have always been about beauty, about rebellion, about marking who you are on the outside so the world can read it. That assumption is thousands of years too shallow, because the ink under this man's skin was never meant to be seen at all. Go back to a September morning in 1991. Two hikers, Helmut and Erika Simon, are crossing a melting glacier on the border between Italy and Austria. Something brown is sticking out of the ice. They think it's a lost climber. It's a lost climber, all right. Just one who got lost around 3,300 years before the birth of Christ. The world would come to call him Ötzi. And when researchers cleaned the ice from his leathery skin, they found the marks. Not pictures, not portraits. Lines, little crosses. Dark bars grouped over his lower back, his knees, his ankles, his wrist. So why lines? Why not a picture of something? Hold that question. In 2015, a researcher named Marco Samadelli lit Ötzi's body with a multispectral camera, one that sees under the skin, into wavelengths your eyes can't. He counted every mark. 61, exactly. Then he mapped where they sat, and they clustered on his joints, on precisely the places a 45-year-old man who spent his life climbing mountains would ache. Now look at your own knees. Look at your lower back after a long day. Ötzi's ink sits right where yours would hurt. Here's where the story turns. You'd guess decoration. Two doctors guessed something else. In 1999, Leopold Dorfer and Frank Barr published a report in the medical journal The Lancet. They took Ötzi's tattoos and laid them over a modern acupuncture chart, the map of pressure points still used today to treat pain. Most of his marks landed almost exactly on the points a modern practitioner would target for back and leg pain. And when they scanned his skeleton, they found arthritis worn into those exact joints. Sit with that for a second. The oldest tattoos on Earth may not be art, they may be a prescription. A Stone Age treatment for pain, needled into the skin, right over the spot that hurt. The needle, in other words, may have come to your species as medicine long before it came as decoration. Is it just me, or does that make every tribal armband look a little less deep? But that raises the next question. Were all ancient tattoos medicine? Because if they were, this is a very short story. They weren't. And to see why, you have to leave the Alps and travel to the Nile. In 2018, a curator at the British Museum named Daniel Antoine turned an infrared camera onto two Egyptian mummies from a place called Gebeline. They were roughly 5,000 years old, and for a century, everyone had assumed the dark smudges on their skin were meaningless stains. Under infrared, the smudges sharpened. On the arm of one man, a wild bull with sweeping horns and a long tail. Beside it, a Barbary sheep with curling horns. On a woman's body, rows of S-shaped marks. These weren't dots for pain. These were pictures, the oldest figurative tattoos ever found on a human being. Real images, chosen, carried on the skin, of powerful animals on a body buried with care. So already you have two completely different reasons, in two different corners of the world, within a few centuries of each other. One man wearing medicine, another wearing power. How many more reasons are there? Go further east. In 1993, a Russian archaeologist named Natalia Polosmak was digging on the Ukok Plateau in the frozen highlands of Siberia. She opened a burial chamber and found a young woman sealed in ice for 2,500 years. When the ice released her skin, a deer emerged, antlers exaggerated into flowing curls, running up her shoulder and down her arm. She wasn't alone in that landscape. Decades earlier, in 1948, another Russian, Sergei Rudenko, had pulled a frozen chieftain from a burial mound of the same Pazyryk people. His body was covered in fantastical beasts, griffins, big cats, twisting horned creatures, inked across his chest and limbs. These were not patients. These were elites, warriors and nobles, wearing entire mythologies on their skin into the grave. So how did they actually do it? What was the tool? For that, cross the ocean. An archaeologist named Aaron Dieter Wolf spent years hunting for the actual instruments. He identified sharpened turkey bone points from Tennessee, worn and stained at the tip. He examined a tool from a cave in Utah, a little handle bound with 2 cactus spines, blackened at the ends, about 2,000 years old, still carrying the residue of ancient ink. Then he did what every good archaeologist secretly wants to do. He made a copy, dipped it in soot, and tattooed a piece of pigskin. It worked perfectly. That's the whole technology. A sharp point, a dark pigment, usually just soot or charred plant matter, and a steady hand, puncturing pigment under the skin so it stays for life. The exact same 3 ingredients humming inside a tattoo machine on a high street near you right now. And the reasons kept multiplying. On the coast of Chile, among the Chinchorro people, one 4,000-year-old man was found with a row of dots tattooed above his lip, a permanent, drawn-on mustache. Not medicine, not myth, possibly just style. So ancient humans didn't dabble in tattoos. They tattooed for pain, for power, for belief, for beauty, for grief. Everywhere anyone has ever found preserved ancient skin, they have found ink in it. Which leaves one last question, the strangest of all. If this practice is that old, that human, that universal, why did so much of the world spend centuries treating it as shameful? The answer is a single, deliberate act of destruction, and it has a face. Start with the word itself. Tattoo isn't an old European word. It's Tahitian, tatau, and it entered English almost by accident. In 1769, the naturalist Joseph Banks, sailing the Pacific with Captain James Cook, watched Polynesian islanders drive pigment under their skin and wrote the local word in his journal. That's how recently the modern West even had a name for a thing your species had been doing for at least 5,000 years. Because before that word arrived, Europe already had a tattoo word, a crueler one, stigma. In ancient Rome, tattoos were a punishment. Slaves were marked so they couldn't run. Criminals were marked so everyone would know. Deserting soldiers were tattooed on the face, a sentence they wore forever. The Greek word stigma literally meant the puncture, the tattoo itself. And it's the same word you still use today when you say someone carries a stigma. Then it got worse. Around the year 316, the Roman Emperor Constantine banned tattooing the face. Not out of mercy, but because he decided a marked face defaced the image of God. A few centuries later, a church council in the year 787 formally condemned tattooing as a pagan act. In a few strokes of law and doctrine, a practice that had been medicine in the Alps, myth in Siberia, and honor across the Pacific was rebranded as barbarism. That is the trick history played on you. Tattooing was never the strange, modern, rebellious thing. The strange, recent thing was the shame. That was invented. That was imposed. That has a date and a signature. So think about the last time you saw a tattoo, and some quiet part of your brain filed it under modern or edgy or not for me. That instinct isn't ancient wisdom. It's the leftover fingerprint of one emperor and one council, a thin few centuries laid over tens of thousands of years in which marking the skin was simply what humans did. Now picture yourself in that chair, the buzz, the sting, the little line of black settling under your skin. You think you're wearing something personal, something that means something only to you. But that needle has been moving under human skin since before your ancestors built a single wall, and the mark it leaves is one of the oldest things you own.